Um, Hi everyone, my name is Jesus. I'm a junior. I'm a CIS major, Sandbox tutor, um, international student from Santo Domingo, if anyone knows where that is. Um, yeah, and this is my project with LeanIX. Nice. Okay, so first off, I just want to have a brief overview over what LeanIX actually does. LeanIX is a startup, and it's essentially a platform that helps companies manage their software estate. Usually as companies get bigger, there's a lot of technologies and applications involved in all of their processes. And sometimes it can become hard to actually know what you're using. So that's what LeanIX handles and what I worked on. So what was my specific task? Long name, but I worked on an obsolescence risk graph chart, which essentially wanted to show which technologies that a company was using were outdated or maybe were about to be updated. This is the former visualization we had. It's beautiful. The one problem that we had is that you couldn't exactly tell what was causing a certain risk, right? So we wanted to essentially have like a drill down view where you could pinpoint, okay, this is the exact thing that's causing this risk. And some of the technologies used, these are just buzzwords to be honest for most of you. VNetwork library, GraphQL, their custom report framework, and TypeScript as opposed to JavaScript. It's way worse. I don't like it personally, but you gotta learn. And the Vue.js framework. I just want to point out that when I first started, I didn't have any idea what any of these meant. So that was one of the biggest challenges, right? Trying to be a developer, trying to learn all of these things on the go that you don't learn in class. But I think that was one of the best lessons I learned. So some project details. This is just going over what exactly entails the obsolescence risk, right? If you look at this chart on the right, the IT components, they might have a certain stage like a phase out or end of life. That means it's near the end of its life cycle and it needs to be updated or addressed. And when one IT component that's a children of an application is outdated, that risk is passed on to its parent, pretty much. So that was definitely something that we had to consider when building this whole thing, is calculating this risk. So this was the project I worked on last semester specifically. I would have given a demo, but I don't have a dongle, so I can't log into my computer. But essentially, we worked on a graphical representation that showed the exact relationships between certain nodes, certain applications, and their children. It was a completely new view for customers. It was incredibly fancy. And this is what I presented last time I spoke. But some of the things I've been working on this semester is essentially when we worked with large applications, it became highly unpredictable. The graph essentially used something called D3 force, which is this like super weird mathematical formula to like space out the nodes. So when you have like a lot of nodes, it can get ugly really quickly. So it was hard to manage. I was going to show the actual demo I've been working on now, but again, I can't. But the main takeaway is that instead of using a graphical representation, we used a chart-based representation, kind of like, go back, kind of like this one, except that it actually has a drill down button, so you can keep going down and down and down and so on. It's not as fancy as a graph, but it was functional, which was another thing I learned, right? You really want to make sure that your project works for everyone, not just that it looks pretty. So yeah. This is a quote from my boss, Bob. When I first asked him on our first meeting, what do you want me to do as an intern? Like, what kind of qualities do you think an intern should have? And the main thing he said is that an intern should want to learn and be curious, and I think that's incredibly true. If I didn't want to learn, I wouldn't have learned any of those like technologies that I used whatsoever. So it's really important if you're trying to be a developer to just always be learning. It doesn't just stop when you graduate school. Every day is a new learning experience, and yeah. Thank you. Special shout out to all the LeanIX employees here, Bob, engineer Paolo, he's not here either, and Professor Feidenberg for providing me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Tell us more about the same question I asked Blake, how you manage this with your tutoring responsibilities and what your like day-to-day involvement with LeanIX was.
Yeah, so the good thing about it was that it was kind of flexible. Sometimes I would work like 3 hours a week. sometimes I'd have these sprints of like 8 hours, 6 hours kind of. So it really depends on what I had going on. So it's definitely manageable as long as I communicated with Bob and so on about what was going on that week. I work at the Sandbox, I think around like 4 to 5 hours ish. So it was manageable. Yeah. Any other questions?
Moses, question for Jesus.
Cool. I think we're going. Oh, go ahead.
So what was your favorite thing about working in the tech industry? Like given that Bentley was like more finance and accounting focused, like
Yeah.
what would you say would be the highlight for you?
Yeah, so I think the highlight for me is that, and this is something I just love about the CIS degree, is that I get to build something. No offense to finance, if there's any finance majors, but to me it's like a lot of numbers. Like, I don't know. I really wanted to like make a product that clients would actually use, and it's actually going to be implemented in the future. It's proof of concept right now, but the idea is that customers actually want this and they need this. So just seeing that impact kind of motivated me, to be honest.
While you were working on the project and as you were analyzing the next, were you able to coordinate kind of things around the classroom? What's your participation in the project in general?
Yeah, so some things that I think helped me was CS 350. GraphQL is kind of like SQL, so to speak. You kind of use it to speak with GraphQL to essentially get this like specific query from LeanIX data that you want to use. So that was helpful to know. CS 230, CS 180, just knowing the basics of any programming language really helped me. So yeah, I think it definitely applies. The only difference is like Blake said, there's no clear instructions, right? You kind of just have to figure it out as you go. But yeah.
Have you worked in an industry position before?
Like one of these?
No, before you were at Linux, you had an experience working as an IT, with an IT company?
I worked with JP Morgan as a software engineer last year. But this was way more hands-on, way more, you need to do it yourself and not being babied. So, yeah. Cool.
What do you think your biggest successes were?
My biggest success, I think, was just actually learning all these new things. At one point, I was like, there's no way I can do all of this. It's just, there's so many files. But I think just as time went on, just actually understanding what was happening in the code, I don't know, I felt like to me that was pretty big, personally.
Just to add on to that too, like what you were talking about with the drill down, adding on to your successes, that's something that our entire CS org is super excited that you've done. So just congrats on that. Like so many of our customers, like I can definitely attest to working with some really big name customers. They're looking for this, and you did that, so that's huge as an intern. Like, you know, so definitely add that onto it too. It helps our entire org for sure. So good job.
Yeah, so that's my motivation right there, actually.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you and Bob and the others to come up with a project that was the right scope for this?
That's a good question, I think. So LeanIX is a very majority rules-based organization in terms of our product roadmap. So we tend to operate off of the requests that we hear the most. We actually have a public-facing roadmap for our product where customers can vote. And if a given product feature gets a certain amount of votes, our product team will then consider it to put that into production eventually. So this is one that we had heard about quite a bit. So I think given the circumstances, it's something that we needed, I think, a little bit quicker too. And I think overall Bob deemed it a pretty good project to have Jesus work on. So yeah, it comes directly from our customers. I don't even think it was like a big thought on our end. It was definitely customer driven. Yeah.
Questions from the students? No one's? Blake?
Is this something you can see yourself pursuing in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love engineering work actually, so I was really happy when I got this. I'll definitely do it in the future. That's my goal. So. Yeah.
Would you have done anything different if you just got the job today and you were starting from scratch? Like, what was the main takeaway you would have changed in the process?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me was actually not the coding, it was communication. When I was speaking to Paulo, who is the head engineer, there were times where it was kind of difficult to envision what he wanted. So a lot of time I spent like maybe making some sort of change that he looked at and he was like, oh, that's not really what I said, you know. So really making sure that everything's planned out beforehand and maybe I have some visuals. And taking just time to understand all of these things is probably what I would have done differently.
Other than the technology skills that you brought, what additional skills did you need to have in order to be successful?
Patience with myself. Like if you have a bug, right, you don't want to stress yourself out and lose hair or something like that. You just want to breathe, take a walk, look at it again, communicate with others. Some of the lessons of CS360 that I'm taking right now, which has to do a lot with like agiles and like planning things out, really helped me too. Just those soft skills, like always be willing to learn and be humble. So, yeah.
I'll ask the same question I asked Blake. Do you think this is kind of like a one-off project for you, or do you think this will continue as like a summer internship with Lean IX?
I can't answer that yet. Maybe. We'll see. It's great work. Yeah. Okay.
We'll take that. Other questions?
Uh-huh.
Okay, come on.
They prepared you for this internship? Like, what were skills that maybe Bentley gave you that you didn't expect to use and you used?
Yeah, so I think the programming classes, just the fact that we're always doing projects. I know everyone's familiar with the burger bot from CS230. It might not be exactly the same, but just that like of having to actually build something really helped me get into it. And some classes like that are based on soft skills, like even GB215, where it's like collaborating and things like that. I think those also prepared me to just work with other people. So.
Did you have to, Blake said that he did a fair amount of documentation and writing about what he did. Did you also need to write a bit to document what you did so that whoever comes on and works on and carries on what you've done will have to start from scratch?
Yeah, so through GitHub, through some of my commits, I had to explain exactly what I was doing with every change. And at first I wrote a lot of comments, like for pretty much every line of code that I did. But as Paulo explained it, he wanted like self-explaining code. So I also learned that my code should speak for itself so that any engineer can look at it and kind of can tell what's going on without needing comments. So that was a big thing too.
What makes code self-explaining?
Making sure your variable names are incredibly clear, right? Don't call something like 1 or 2. Make sure it's related to the function. You need to separate business logic from the actual like front-end design. That should go in another file based on more back-end work, things like that.
Nick?
Why'd you use TypeScript instead of JavaScript?
That's a great question for my boss. Now I'm playing. It's TypeScript lets you create things called types pretty much. So like if there's a certain, kind of like an object, if there's something that kind of looks like an object that has a certain format, like certain data points under it, you want to use a type for that. Like create custom types pretty much, which you can't do with JavaScript, sadly. But, yeah.